Welcome to another episode of HARLEM Legal Spotlight. My name is Rita Egboche. I am the Executive HR here at HARLEM Solicitors. And with me here is Timilehin Olalusi. She is our Executive Associate here at HARLEM Solicitors. You are welcome, Timilehin.
Thank you so much, Rita.
We are pleased to have you here.
I'm pleased to be here too.
Okay, so your topic today is something very catchy. It's something I find really fascinating. You know, when you hear the word agreement, what comes to our mind, what comes to my mind especially is land agreement or contract agreement. So Timilehin, I would want you to give us a brief overview of what prenuptial agreement means.
Thank you so much, Rita.
You're welcome.
So before I delve into the historical background of a prenuptial agreement, I believe for better understanding, it is essential for me to explain what we mean by a prenuptial agreement, or we call it prenup for short. So a prenuptial agreement is a written contract between a bride and a groom-to-be specifying how they want their property to be distributed or to remain theirs in the event of divorce. This is very important for couples or intending couples who have accumulated wealth or financial assets over the years, and they have it in several countries. So they have it like a safeguard or a net to safeguard themselves for the future in the event of a divorce. So in the historical background, in the ancient, prenuptial agreements actually date back to ancient civilization before the common law. And before the common law came into being, such as the ancient Egypt, we have the Mesopotamia and the Hebrews. In this society, marriage contracts were common and often included provisions for the division of property, assets, in the case of divorce or death of the partner. In medieval Europe, marriage contracts became more particular among the nobles and the elites, because you know they have more financial assets, they have financial interests to also protect. So they have this marriage contract in place to protect themselves. Prenuptial agreements, these agreements were known as marriage settlements. Prenuptial agreements evolved over time under the English common law. They were known as antenuptial agreements. These agreements were used to specify the financial obligations of spouses in the event of divorce or death. However, in the 20th century, prenuptial agreements gained popularity in the United States, and this is more of the mid-20th century. So the courts were reluctant to enforce prenuptial agreements. Why? Because they feel it's against public policy, the sanctity of marriage. But today, prenuptial agreements are widely used around the world, and they are recognized as legally enforceable contracts, allowing couples to define their financial rights and responsibilities.
Thank you so much, Timilehin. This is really educating, and I'm finding it so interesting.
Thank you.
So there's a question I want to ask Timilehin.
Oh, okay.
You talked about it being all over the country. So I want to ask, is it limited to specific countries, or is prenuptial agreement enforceable in all countries?
Oh, thank you for that question.
You're welcome.
As I mentioned earlier, courts were not really so open. They were reluctant to enforce prenuptial agreement because they believe it's against public policy and against the sanctity of marriage. However, over time, courts began to recognize the validity of prenups, and they recognize the validity, especially between couples, because the divorce rates went off the roof. You would notice over the years, the divorce rate has really been going. It's not just limited to Nigeria, but other countries. So it would be an error to assume that prenuptial agreements are enforceable in all the countries in the globe. Do you understand?
Yes,
me?
I'm with you.
So, with the global explosion in divorce rates in many countries of the world, intending couples now resort to pre-financial planning and signing of prenuptial agreements before marriage. So, the enforceability of prenups varies significantly from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. There are countries where prenups may be enforceable. There are some where the law regarding prenup are not clear or subject to certain conditions. So, for instance, prenuptial agreements are not universally enforceable in the whole of Africa, as enforceability of prenup varies from country to country across the country. across the continent. Each African country has its own legal system and laws governing marriage, divorce, and property rights, which are to an extent can affect the validity and enforceability of prenuptial agreements. So in some African countries, prenups are recognized as enforceable, while in others they may not be legally binding or may be subject to certain restraints or conditions. Okay, so a few examples of African countries which recognize and enforce prenuptial agreements are: one, let's come down home to Nigeria.
Amazing.
Amazing, right? So Nigeria recognizes the prenups under Section 72 of the Matrimonial Causes Act, and they are enforceable subject to certain conditions. One, it must be in writing, like every other valid contract in Nigeria has to be in writing. It must have terms of full financial disclosure between the bride and the groom to be, so meaning the intending couples. Three, it has to be fair. It shouldn't contain terms that are kind of biased, that maybe project a kind of gender discrimination. It has to be fair to both parties. And also, four, not contrary to public policy. Very, very important. You know, if you cast your mind back, you know, I said courts were reluctant to, you know, enforce prenuptial agreement because they believe it was contrary to public policy. So if you have this condition in place and you are checked it out on the conditions, if you are able to do that, make sure it's not contrary to public policy, then that is fine. And then number five, it must be voluntary. It must be a voluntary agreement between the parties. There shouldn't be any moments of coercion or undue influence between both parties. We also, in South Africa, we have prenuptial agreements, also known as the antenuptial contract, that's ANCS. So ANC are widely recognized and enforceable in South Africa. There are different types, such as those with accrual or without accrual. Then going to Kenya. In Kenya, prenups are recognized and enforced under the Matrimonial Property Act. However, they are subjected to certain legal requirements, just like in Nigeria. There are some certain conditions, like I mentioned, you have to meet up with. Also in Ghana, like in other jurisdictions, prenups are recognized and enforced under the country's law. In Egypt, prenups in Egypt are governed by the Egyptian Civil Code and are used to regulate financial and property matters in marriage. Also in Morocco, you can see I keep listening and listening, though they are not limited to these African countries, but just to bring up a few. In Morocco, prenups are known as marriage contracts and they are governed by Moroccan family law. Also, several countries in Asia recognize and enforce prenuptial agreements to varying degrees. You know, it's us taking a step across different continents. So let's just take it across like that, so we know, okay, fine. Because your question is it applicable to all countries? Okay. So in Asia, we have Japan, we have the South Korea, we have China, we have India. India, let's pause at India. India is, you know, it's a country that places the sanctity upon marriage.
Yes, it is.
Marriage is a very big deal in India.
Yes.
So though prenups are not specifically regulated by Indian law, they are recognized and enforced in India. They are governed by contract law principle because it is classified under contract law. Because they feel, why should you have a mindset that in case there's a divorce, okay, we're going to have this kind of contract to apply to us? No, there should be that sanctity. So under Hinduism, it is no. A prenuptial agreement is a no, but it's classified under contract law principles. For Singapore, prenuptial agreements are known as prenups and governed under the Women Charter. In Europe, several countries also recognize and enforce prenuptial agreements. Some of these countries are, we have Germany, we have France, we have Sweden, we have Spain, we have Italy, and we have the United Kingdom. Now, let's take a pause. On the United Kingdom, though prenups are not strictly binding, courts in the UK will generally uphold prenups where they are fair and reasonable, not contrary to public policy or deceptive. Going to England, prenups are not automatically binding in England. Like I mentioned earlier on, the courts are reluctant. They feel it's against public policy. Why should you have a prenup? Why should you have terms specifying how your financial assets should be distributed after your divorce or in the event of divorce or death? So prenups in England are not automatically binding. Courts are, however, willing to give weight to prenups where certain criteria are observed, such as independent legal advice, fairness, full financial disclosure, no duress or undue influence. Furthermore, in the United States, now, coming to the big one, enforceability of prenups varies from state to state, but they are generally recognized and enforceable. Overall, courts in various countries of the continent are now willing to enforce prenuptial agreements if they satisfy certain conditions.
It's been so educative. Thank you so much, Timi.
You're welcome.
Now, there's a question that came to mind while you were talking.
Okay.
Talking about drafting prenuptial agreements, I
Okay.
want to ask, is there a standardized template on how we should go about drafting prenuptial agreements? Or, okay, in across the globe, can we say that, okay, certain countries have their own template? Or is there one template guiding prenuptial agreement binding?
Oh, thank you for that. As
You're welcome.
amazing and easy that would have been for lawyers, no, there is no standardized template for drafting a prenuptial agreement that applies across the globe. However, prenuptial agreements are governed by the laws of different individual countries or states, and specific legal requirements and considerations can vary significantly from one jurisdiction or to the other. So while some countries may have general guidelines or statutory provisions governing prenuptial agreements, the details and nuances of the agreement are often dependent on the specific law and practices of each jurisdiction. So in conclusion, what I mean is prenuptial agreements are tailored to the specific needs and circumstances of the parties involved. So basically, it varies. It's not the same. We would love it. Lawyers would love it to have a particular template apply, but no. Jurisdiction differs.
Yes. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Timilehin. Now, Timilehin, I've heard you said a whole lot, which has been so educative. Now, I want to hear your opinion. Now, in your own opinion, do you think prenuptial agreement is against public policy and also the sanctity of marriage? I want to hear your view on it.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Actually, this question is a subject of debates, and several factors such as the cultural, social, and legal perspective must be taken into consideration. I can't just say, oh, this is how I feel. I have to take all this into consideration before giving my answer. However, in my opinion, prenuptial agreements are not against public policy. Yes, I'll reiterate that. Prenuptial agreements are not against public policy and the sanctity of marriage. Others might actually argue that prenup undermines marital sanctity, commitment, creates inequality in bargaining power, creates emotional tension and distrust among the parties within the relationship. However, in my opinion, I believe one, prenups allow individuals protect their financial interests and rights, provide level of security and certainty in the event of divorce or death. So two, it promotes the financial transparency between parties before marriage. I mean, you're going into marriage for what? You must have transparency. Do you get?
Yes.
So when we have a prenuptial agreement, it's not going to state terms that are alien to both parties. It's just to show, okay, fine, this is how much I'm worth, this is how much you're worth. We want to know how we're going to divide it. So if your relationship cannot survive financial planning, then it won't most likely survive financial challenges. And three, it also respects individual autonomy and their rights to make informed choices about their financial future. That's my opinion.
Thank you so much, Timilehin. It has really been an amazing session with you. So I have a question to ask. I want to know, hearing about prenuptial agreements,
Yes.
I am certain that viewers watching would also want to know if setting up prenuptial agreement is only for the wealthiest people. Take for instance, how about the masses? They will limit it to just, if you don't have money, you can't set it up, or it's made for, it's only if you have money that it's a working through for you.
That's amazing. Most times laymen would think, prenuptial agreements is only for the rich.
Exactly.
I'm not rich, so I don't need to have a
Exactly,
prenuptial
my God.
agreement. I get your point. So prenuptial agreements are not exclusively for the wealthiest individuals, although they are often associated with persons with high net worth, individuals or couples with substantial assets. While it is true that prenups are common, they are common or commonly used among the wealthy individuals to protect their assets and financial interests. Of course, I mean, a wealthy man would want to protect his financial interests. It's not as if you're going into marriage with that mindset of, oh, there might be divorce later. But you know, for what you've accumulated so far, you have to protect. So it is just basically to protect their assets and financial interests, and it can be beneficial for people from all socio-economic backgrounds. Prenuptial agreements serve various purposes beyond asset protection. It could include debt protection. I mean, going into marriage, your other party, the other party, which is maybe either the groom to be or the bride, could have a huge amount of debt, maybe student loan or anything it is, whatever it is. You know, you're going to share the burden. So it's better you define it. What should I be bound by? Do you understand in this relationship? So for also preservation of family property or heirlooms. For example, you could have a particular item in your family that you pass down from generation to generation. Just imagine in the event of divorce, you know, they bring together all properties belonging to both parties and it is divided. It depends, maybe it's the communal sharing or the equitable sharing. So you know it is not protected. So for you, you want to protect what belongs to your family. Also, we have the protection of business interests. We have protection of emotional heartaches, against emotional heartaches, tensions, and arguments. Also for spousal support, and also for to transfer property to children from previous marriages. Do you understand?
Yes,
so basically, these are reasons why we draw up or we draft up prenuptial agreements. So it's not basically for the rich alone. Let me correct that. It's for everybody.
It's for everybody.
It's open
it
to everybody.
everybody.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much, Timilehin.
You're
I
welcome.
love that prenuptial agreement is not just limited to marriage alone.
Oh no, it's not biased.
One thing I love is the fact that it also covers debt and many other amazing opportunities and many other amazing features
Of course.
alongside it.
Of
So
course.
one last question, Timilehin, before we call it a wrap. I want to know, and I'm certain that our viewers would also want to know,
All right.
does prenuptial agreement, does it encourage gender discrimination during divorce? Is it, oh, okay, it is for ladies supporting ladies, men supporting men? Or I want to hear your take on it.
Okay, that's a big one. Prenuptial agreements are in themselves, they do not inherently encourage gender discrimination during divorce. However, there are valid concerns that poorly drafted or unfairly structured prenups could potentially lead to gender discrimination, particularly if they disproportionately disadvantage one spouse, often the economically disadvantaged one, typically the women. Ultimately, the enforceability and fairness of prenuptial agreements, as well as their potential impact on gender equality during divorce, depend on various factors, and including the specific terms of the agreements, the circumstances surrounding its negotiation and execution, and the legal standard of the jurisdiction when it is enforced. So basically, in a nutshell, the terms have to be fair to both parties. It doesn't encourage gender discrimination.
Thank you so much, Timilehin. So we've learned a lot.
Yes,
I personally have learned a lot, and I am certain that our viewers have also learned a lot. It was an educative session with you. It's a pleasure having you here once again. Thank you so much to our amazing viewers. Thank you for staying tuned to the end of this episode with Timilehin. It was an amazing section, I know, right? So you get to see us in our next episode. I remain Rita Egbeche. See you. Bye-bye.